So I'll go ahead. My name is Bryan Horsley. I'm the restoration technician and the Cyanobacteria program manager with the Association to Preserve Cape Cod. The Association to Preserve Cape Cod, or APCC as we call it, is a nonprofit environmental organization with the goal to protect, preserve, and restore natural resources of Cape Cod. They've been in existence on the Cape since 1968, so this is our 52nd year of this work, although I can only take credit for 3.5 of those years. Recent growth of the organization has included building this program, which we call our Pond Health Program, where we're actually conducting cyanobacteria monitoring. So that's what I'm planning to talk with you about today. So our CYANO program was initiated back in 2017 and was really initiated after we hosted a talk with Hillary down on the Cape and learned about the CMC program. Shortly thereafter, we met Nancy Leland, who I believe is there in the audience today, and learned about her research and work with the CMC and UNH, and learned that there were some methods for forecasting formation of cyanobacteria blooms, which got us very interested. So that summer of 2017, working with one of our interns, we did a trial of the CMC methods in 4 different lakes on the Cape. And that was very exciting for us in that we documented blooms in 2 of those 4 ponds that season, and notified the appropriate towns, and actually had advisory notices posted because of our work. So that was really eye-opening for us that, these ponds weren't being looked at, and that, this very user-friendly monitoring methodology, was able to document these blooms and protect public health. So since then, we've continued to grow the program. So our second season doing cyanobacteria monitoring in 2018, we applied the results of some recent research, again, working with Nancy Leland and other partners on the Cape, and launched what we call our rapid assessment protocol. And the intention of this rapid assessment protocol is to monitor ponds regularly throughout the season, throughout the warm season, to track cyanobacterial populations and to forecast when harmful algal blooms appear to be forming. So that season we began working with towns and pond groups on a contractual basis, actually. So towns were actually hiring us as well as pond groups to train their volunteers and then analyze the samples and interpret results and communicate those results back to them. So that season, the second season, we sampled 10 lakes and ponds regularly. By regularly, we conducted sampling every other week. Although when conditions seemed to be nearing bloom formation, we would up the frequency of sampling to weekly or even more. And then whenever we found something concerning, we would document it in every way that we could and communicate those results back to the towns and pond groups to let them make the ultimate decision of whether or not a advisory posting was needed. There we go. So the rapid assessment protocol, or the RAP method as we call it, consisted of organize and training volunteer sampling teams. We did collect a lot of the samples ourselves, but with our intentions to conduct sampling in as many ponds as possible, it was essential to have a lot of help. So in the springtime, we would hold volunteer training events, and then we would initiate sampling from May through October, assuming that was the time period when we're most likely to see harmful blooms forming. And again, we conducted the sampling generally on a 2-week interval. So the methods entailed a combination of different ways of looking at the situation. So we started off with field observations, taking notes on water clarity, water color, whether there's any presence of scum or floating particles, whether there's any odor and different things like that. We would collect samples in the field again, based on the CMC methods. And then we would bring this back to our lab workspace and conduct microscopy, identifying which types of cyanobacteria were present, which types were most dominant in the sample, and then conducting a unit count. And that's actually how we got at the dominance. So we weren't actually conducting cell counts, but we were getting a general sense on a gridded counting slide of which type was most dominant in that slide. We would then freeze the samples and thaw them, again, following CMC's methods, and measure the phycocyanin concentration using a fluorometer. And that's how we were getting at the general abundance of cyanobacteria in that particular sample. And our goal in all of this was to get the results back so that we could communicate the results and get those results back in less than 24 hours. We would then interpret the results and using a scale that we created, really come back with, whether the cyanobacterial levels in that particular sample were low, moderate, or high. We would then communicate those results on a map that's hosted on the APCC website. The goal with that was just to provide general public access to most recent monitoring results. And so basically what that was is a color-coded map that would show the ponds, showing different colors based on our findings. And I'll show an example of that in a minute. In addition to uploading results to the map, we would also email weekly reports back to pond groups and town staff. And then anytime we found what we considered to be high levels, which generally entailed high phycocyanin concentrations and visible scum on the surface of the pond, we would then also reach out and contact the town and the state to recommend that an advisory may be needed. And then lastly, communicating our results, we would produce end of season reports. So basically just summarizing the findings throughout the whole season.
And so Brian, just so you know, you have about like 2 or 3 minutes remaining.
Okay. In the 15. Okay, I'll pick it up. Thank you. So this past season, 2019, we really ramped things up. We sampled more than 40 lakes this season, working directly with 6 towns and 5 pond groups and more than 50 volunteers. So the program has grown very rapidly. Let's see, I mentioned we've been structuring the program on a contractual basis with the towns and pond groups. This is basically how we're covering our time and the equipment needed to do this. I mentioned already that we provided a summary of season results at the end of the season. We had the Cyanobacteria map where we were sharing results. I just wanted to point out that this past season, 2019, was the most active season we've seen on the Cape. Both of those images to the left are ones that I took at different lakes. And we saw blooms on the Cape lasting until the middle of December this year, which seemed really crazy. Let's see, we also had towns contacting us, which we found to be a bit interesting, but towns were actually reaching out to us to have us come inspect their ponds, even when we didn't have a contract in place with them. So we felt that was an important service we were able to offer to towns across the Cape. Let's see. And then, one concerning point that I wanted to point out is there's quite a variation in the response from towns. When we would reach out with, photographs with, pictures of ponds on the left and, positive toxin results using some Abraxas test strips and, microscope images loaded with cyanobacteria, some towns wouldn't even respond. Other towns would take it very seriously. So this is an issue that we're working on right now, is trying to optimize the communication and response protocols throughout the Cape. And this is just a quick example of the cyanobacteria map that we've launched on our website. So it's an Esri ArcGIS online-based map. And like I said, just color codes the ponds. When you click on an individual pond, it'll give you a short description of what the findings were and what our interpretation was. This map shows the cyanobacterial algal blooms that we documented in 2019. So there were actually 17 official closures across the Cape. And I would say that there were definitely many lower level blooms that occurred that were not officially posted with advisory notices.
Okay, you
So-
have time, so this should just do a very brief, whatever your last parting thought is.
All right, so I'll just say 2020, we're looking to expand the program continually. And I think that's all I need to say at this point. I guess if there are any questions